I never thought a cheap space heater would land someone in jail. But then again, I never anticipated dealing with Brenda Carmichael from the Homeowners Association either. It was January in Columbus, Ohio, and the kind of cold that made your bones ache had settled over the city like a frozen blanket. My apartment in the Riverside Meadows complex was on the third-floor corner unit, and despite what the landlord had promised when I signed the lease, the heating system was absolute garbage. The radiator in my bedroom clanked and groaned but barely produced enough warmth to keep a hamster comfortable, let alone a full-grown man trying to work from home. My name is Tyler Brennan, and I had moved into this complex 6 months earlier after landing a remote position with a tech startup based in Austin. The rent was reasonable for Columbus, the location was decent, and I figured I could make it work. What I had not factored into the equation was Brenda, the self-appointed HOA president who treated the property like her personal kingdom. The space heater I bought was nothing fancy, just a basic ceramic model from Target that cost me $42. I set it up in my bedroom so I could actually sleep without piling on 4 blankets, and in my home office so my fingers would not go numb while typing code. It made a world of difference. For the first time in weeks, I could actually focus on my work without shivering. Everything was fine for about 3 weeks. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in late January, I came home from grabbing groceries to find my apartment door slightly ajar. My heart rate kicked up immediately. I pushed the door open slowly, half expecting to find the place ransacked, but everything looked normal at first glance. My laptop was still on my desk, my TV was mounted on the wall where it belonged, and my gaming console sat undisturbed. I walked through the living room, checking each room carefully, and that is when I noticed it. The space heater was gone, not just moved, gone, completely absent from my bedroom where I had left it that morning. I checked every room twice, looked in closets, under the bed, even in the bathroom for some inexplicable reason. Nothing. Someone had come into my apartment and taken my space heater. I immediately called the non-emergency police line to report the break-in. Officer Martinez showed up about 40 minutes later, a stocky guy in his mid-30s with a notepad and a slightly bored expression that suggested he had seen this kind of thing 100 times before. He walked through my apartment, examined the door lock, which showed no signs of forced entry, and asked me the standard questions. "Any idea who might have a key to your place?" he asked, scribbling notes. "Just the property management office," I said. "And I guess whoever they give keys to." "You keep valuables here? Jewelry, cash, anything like that?" "I mean, I have my laptop, my electronics, but none of that was touched, just the space heater." Officer Martinez raised an eyebrow. "Just the space heater, nothing else?" "Nothing, which is weird, right?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, that is definitely unusual. Most burglars are not breaking in to steal a $40 appliance when there is a laptop sitting right there. You have any disputes with neighbors? Anyone who might want to mess with you?" I thought about it. I kept to myself mostly, worked from home, did not throw parties or make noise. The only real interaction I had with anyone in the building was with Brenda from the HOA, and that had been just a few minor encounters. She had left a passive-aggressive note on my door once about not leaving my recycling bin out past 7 in the morning, and she had stopped me in the parking lot another time to remind me that decorative flags were not permitted on balconies without HOA approval. "There is this HOA president, Brenda Carmichael," I said, "but I cannot imagine she would break into my apartment." Officer Martinez wrote down the name. "You would be surprised what people do in HOA disputes." "I will make a report, but honestly, without any signs of forced entry and only a space heater missing, There is not much we can do unless you have evidence pointing to someone specific. After he left, I sat on my couch, frustrated and confused. The whole thing felt surreal. Who breaks into an apartment to steal just a space heater? I decided to check with the property management office the next morning to see if they had any information about who might have accessed my unit. That night, my apartment felt colder than ever. Without the space heater, my bedroom was like a meat locker. I piled on extra blankets and tried to sleep, but I kept waking up shivering. The next morning, I headed down to the property management office as soon as it opened at 9. The property manager, a tired-looking woman in her 50s named Carol Fletcher, listened to my story with growing concern. "No one from our office entered your apartment yesterday," she said, pulling up records on her computer. "We log every entry, and there is nothing here for your unit." "Are you sure someone came in? The space heater did not just walk away on its own," I said. Carol frowned. "Let me check something." She typed for a moment, then her frown deepened. "Okay, this is interesting. There was a key checked out yesterday afternoon for your unit, but it was not checked out by any of our staff. Who checked it out?" According to this, Brenda Carmichael. She noted that she was conducting a routine HOA inspection. I felt a surge of anger. "She came into my apartment without my permission and took my space heater." Well, technically, the HOA does have provisions for inspections, but she is supposed to give 24 hours notice, and I should have been copied on the notification. I was not. Carol looked genuinely troubled now. "Let me call her and find out what is going on." She dialed Brenda's number on speakerphone. After 4 rings, Brenda answered with a crisp, "This is Brenda Carmichael." "Brenda, it is Carol from the management office. I have Tyler Brennan here, and he is reporting that you entered his apartment yesterday and removed his space heater." There was a pause, then Brenda's voice came back, smooth and unapologetic. "That is correct. I conducted a routine inspection and found a prohibited heating device in violation of HOA regulations. I confiscated it in accordance with our authority to maintain safety standards." I could not believe what I was hearing. "You had no right to come into my apartment and take my property." "Mr. Brennan," Brenda said, her tone turning icy, "when you signed your lease, you agreed to abide by all HOA rules and regulations. Section 12, Paragraph 4, Subsection B clearly states that portable heating devices exceeding 1,500 watts are prohibited due to fire safety concerns and electrical load limitations. Your space heater was 1,800 watts. It posed a danger to the entire building. Then you leave a notice and give me a chance to remove it myself. You do not just break into my home and steal my stuff. I did not break in. I used a management key for a legitimate HOA inspection, and it is not theft, it is confiscation of prohibited materials. If you wish to contest this, you may file an appeal with the HOA board at our next meeting, which is scheduled for the second Tuesday of next month." My hands clenched into fists. "I want my space heater back. Now. That is not going to happen. The device has been disposed of as per safety protocols. Have a good day, Mr. Brennan." The line went dead. I looked at Carol, who appeared just as shocked as I felt. "Can she actually do that?" Carol shook her head slowly. "Technically, the HOA does have authority to enforce rules, but confiscating personal property without proper notice is highly questionable, and she definitely should have coordinated with me. Let me pull up your lease and the HOA bylaws." She spent the next 10 minutes reading through documents on her computer, occasionally muttering under her breath. Finally, she looked up at me. "Okay, so here is the situation. The HOA does have a rule about high wattage heating devices, but the rule specifies that violations should be addressed through a written warning first, with a 48-hour period to remedy the violation. Only after that can they take enforcement action. She skipped all of that. Also, confiscation is supposed to be coordinated with property management, not done unilaterally. She went rogue here. So what can I do? Well, you could file a complaint with the HOA board, but since Brenda basically is the HOA board, that probably would not get you anywhere. You could take legal action, but for a $40 space heater, the legal fees would not be worth it. Or, she paused, looking thoughtful, or you could file a theft report with the police. What she did, regardless of her claimed authority, was take your property without following proper procedures. That could be considered theft. I had already filed a report, but Officer Martinez had said there was not much they could do without evidence. Now, I had evidence. Brenda had admitted to taking the heater. Can you write up a statement about what just happened? About her admitting to taking it? Carol nodded. Absolutely. And I will be having a serious conversation with the landlord about Brenda's overreach here. This is not okay. I left the office with Carol's written statement and a renewed sense of purpose. I called the police station and asked to speak with Officer Martinez, explaining that I now had evidence about who had taken my property. He asked me to come down to the station to provide the new information. At the station, I gave Officer Martinez the statement from Carol and explained Brenda's admission over the phone. He read through everything, then leaned back in his chair. So, we have got HOA drama, he said with a slight smile. Look, Mr. Brennan, technically speaking, what you have here could be pursued as theft or possibly breaking and entering since she entered without proper notice. But it is a gray area because she did have access through property management and claims it was for an official inspection. The prosecutor might not want to touch this, so she just gets away with it. I did not say that. Let me talk to my sergeant. If nothing else, we can bring her in for a conversation and see if we can get your space heater back or get you reimbursed. Sometimes people back down when they realize the police are taking it seriously. 2 days later, I got a call from Officer Martinez. He sounded amused. So, I paid a visit to Mr. Carmichael this morning, he said. Interesting conversation. She insisted she was within her rights, showed me a copy of the HOA bylaws, the whole 9 yards, very confident, very self-righteous. Did you get my space heater back? Well, that is the thing. She claims she already disposed of it by taking it to a recycling center. But she offered to reimburse you $42 to cover the cost. It was not about the money at this point. It was about the principle, about Brenda thinking she could just waltz into people's homes and take whatever she wanted. But I also knew that pushing this further might not get me anywhere. Fine, I said. I will take the $42. I figured you might say that. She is going to drop off a check at the police station and you can pick it up here. And Mr. Brennan, do yourself a favor and invest in a lower wattage space heater that complies with the HOA rules. It'll save you a lot of headaches. I picked up the check a few days later. $42, signed in Brenda's precise, angular handwriting. I deposited it and bought a new space heater, this one carefully selected to be only 1,000 watts, well under the HOA limit. I kept the receipt and the box with the wattage specifications clearly visible, just in case Brenda decided to make another unannounced visit. But that is not where the story ends. In fact, that is where it gets interesting. About a week after I got my reimbursement check, I noticed something odd. My apartment felt warmer, not just in the rooms where I was using my new, compliant space heater, but everywhere. The radiator that had been barely functional for months was suddenly pumping out serious heat. The whole apartment was actually comfortable for the first time since I had moved in. I mentioned it to my neighbor across the hall, a grad student named Marcus who I occasionally chatted with in the parking lot. "Yeah, same here," he said. "I thought maybe they finally fixed the heating system. About time, right?" But then, about 2 weeks after that conversation, I ran into Carol from the property management office in the lobby. She looked stressed, clutching a folder full of papers. "Tyler," she said when she saw me. "Do you have a minute?" "Sure, what is up?" She glanced around, then lowered her voice. "Have you noticed the heat working better lately?" "Yeah, actually, I figured maintenance finally fixed something." "That is what I thought too. But then we got the utility bills for the building." She shook her head. "The electricity usage has gone absolutely through the roof. Like, double what it normally is. The landlord is freaking out because it is going to cost thousands of extra dollars. What is causing it? We do not know. We have had electricians checking the building systems, looking for shorts or malfunctions, but everything checks out fine on that end. The only explanation is that someone in the building is using a massive amount of electricity, but we cannot figure out who or why." A thought occurred to me. "Do you track usage by individual units?" "We can, but it is a pain because this building is old and the meters are set up weird." The landlord ordered a detailed breakdown, though. We should have that in a few days. I thought about it as I headed back up to my apartment. Someone was using an enormous amount of electricity, enough to double the building's usage. That was not normal appliance usage or even someone running a bunch of computers. That was something major. 3 days later, Carol called me. She sounded excited. "Tyler, we found it. The utility spike. You are never going to believe where it is coming from." "Where?" "Brenda Carmichael's unit. Her electricity usage has been off the charts for the past 3 weeks. The timeline clicked into place in my head. 3 weeks ago was exactly when Brenda had confiscated my space heater. "Wait," I said slowly. "You think she is using my space heater?" "I do not know what she is using, but she is using something. The landlord is livid because these units are supposed to have utilities included, but there is a clause in the lease that residents are responsible for excessive usage beyond normal residential levels. He is sending someone to inspect her unit tomorrow. Can I be there?" Carol hesitated. "That is probably not appropriate since it is technically a landlord-tenant matter, but I will let you know what we find." The next day dragged on forever. I tried to focus on work, writing code and attending virtual meetings, but my mind kept wandering back to Brenda and the mystery of the utility spike. Finally, around 4 in the afternoon, Carol called. "You need to hear this," she said, and she sounded like she was trying not to laugh. "What happened?" "Okay, so the landlord and I went to Brenda's unit this morning with an electrician to investigate the power usage. Brenda was not happy about it, but the lease gives the landlord the right to inspect with proper notice, which we gave. And Tyler, you will not believe what we found." "What?" "Space heaters. Like 8 of them. Running constantly throughout her entire apartment. The place was like a sauna. And one of them was your space heater, the 1800-watt one she claimed she had disposed of." I felt a surge of vindication mixed with disbelief. "She has been using it. And she got 7 more. It gets better." We started asking questions, and it turns out Brenda had been going around to other units over the past few weeks, conducting these bogus inspections and confiscating space heaters from multiple residents. She claimed they were all safety violations. Then she kept them and was running them in her own apartment because she said the building heat was insufficient for her medical needs. "You have got to be kidding me." I wish I was. The landlord is beyond furious. Not only did she essentially steal property from multiple residents, but her excessive power usage is going to cost him about $3,000 in excess utility charges this month alone. What happens now? The landlord is filing eviction proceedings based on lease violations and theft. He is also reporting her to the police for the theft of property from multiple residents, and he is demanding reimbursement for the excess utility costs. I felt a grim satisfaction. Brenda had been so confident in her authority, so sure that she was in the right, and now it was all coming down around her. What about my space heater? Can I get it back? Absolutely. The landlord is holding all of them as evidence for now, but once the police document everything, you will get it back, along with several other residents who are just finding out their stuff was taken too. Over the next few days, the story spread through the building like wildfire. It turned out Brenda had confiscated space heaters from 6 different units, telling everyone the same story about safety violations and disposal. She had taken them all to her apartment and ran them constantly because, as she later claimed to anyone who would listen, she had Raynaud's disease and needed a consistently warm environment for her health. The police got involved when the landlord filed a formal complaint. Detective Sarah Chen from the Columbus Police Department came to take statements from all the affected residents. I met with her in the property management office along with the 5 other people Brenda had taken heaters from. This is a pretty clear-cut case of theft, Detective Chen said after hearing our stories. She had no legal authority to take your property, regardless of any HOA rules. The proper procedure would have been to issue warnings and, if necessary, pursue fines or other penalties through legal channels. What she did was just steal your stuff. What kind of charges will she face? Asked one of the other residents, a younger woman named Paula who lived on the 2nd floor. Likely theft, possibly multiple counts depending on how the prosecutor wants to handle it. Given that she used her position with the HOA and access to the building to commit the thefts, there might be additional charges related to abuse of authority or breaking and entering. The dollar value of all the heaters combined is probably around $300, which would typically be petty theft, but the aggravating factors might bump it up. And the utility costs? I asked. The landlord is out $3,000 because of her. That is a civil matter between her and the landlord, but it definitely does not look good for her. It shows a pattern of deception and self-dealing. A week later, Brenda was arrested. I was not there to see it, but Marcus told me he watched from his window as 2 police officers walked her out of the building in handcuffs. He said she was yelling the entire time about how this was a violation of her rights and how the HOA bylaws supported her actions. The arrest made the local news, not because it was a major crime, but because the story was so bizarre. HOA president arrested for space heater theft ring, read the headline on the Columbus Dispatch website. The article detailed how Brenda had systematically taken heaters from residents under false pretenses and used them to run up thousands in electricity costs that the landlord was responsible for. The building was buzzing with conversation. Some people thought the arrest was excessive, that it was just a civil matter that got out of hand. Others, particularly those of us who had been on the receiving end of Brenda's authoritarian HOA enforcement over the months, felt it was long overdue accountability. The landlord, whose name was Richard Morrison, and who I had never actually met before all this started, called a building meeting 2 weeks after Brenda's arrest. About 30 residents showed up in the common room on the 1st floor. Richard was a balding man in his 60s who looked thoroughly exhausted by the entire situation. He stood at the front of the room with Carol beside him. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I want to address the situation with Brenda Carmichael and the HOA. First, I want to apologize. When I contracted with Brenda to manage the HOA 2 years ago, I thought I was getting someone organized and responsible. Clearly, that was a mistake. "What is happening with the HOA now?" someone called out. Effective immediately, Brenda is removed from her position as HOA president. Given that she was essentially the only active member of the board, we need to restructure completely. I am proposing that we either dissolve the HOA entirely or form a new board with multiple members and proper oversight. We will be taking a vote on that. What about the utility costs? Another resident asked. That is between me and Brenda. I am pursuing legal action to recover those costs, separate from the criminal charges she is facing. Your utilities are covered as per your leases, and that is not going to change. What about all the ridiculous rules she was enforcing? Marcus asked. Are those still in effect? Richard sighed. We are going to review all existing HOA rules and regulations. Some of them are necessary for safety and property maintenance. Others, like the prohibition on balcony flags or the restrictions on certain types of appliances, are going to be revised or eliminated. My goal is to make this a more reasonable place to live, not a dictatorship. The meeting continued for another 45 minutes, with residents voicing concerns and suggestions. By the end, we had voted to maintain a streamlined HOA with a newly elected 3-person board and significantly reduced rule enforcement. I was not interested in being on the board myself, but I was glad to see the changes happening. Brenda's criminal case moved through the system over the next few months. She initially pleaded not guilty, maintaining that she had authority through the HOA to confiscate prohibited items. Her lawyer tried to argue that it was a civil dispute, not a criminal matter. But the prosecutor pointed out that she had entered apartments without proper notice, taken property that did not belong to her, lied about disposing of it, and used it for her own benefit while costing the landlord thousands of dollars. I was called to testify at a preliminary hearing in March. The courtroom was small, just a preliminary proceeding to determine if there was enough evidence to go to trial. I sat in the witness box and answered questions from both the prosecutor and Brenda's defense attorney. Mr. Brennan, the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Angela Reed, asked me, "Did you give Brenda Carmichael permission to enter your apartment on January 23rd? No, I did not. Did you give her permission to take your space heater? Absolutely not. And when she claimed to have disposed of it at her recycling center, was that true? No. It was found in her apartment weeks later, running along with 7 other heaters she had taken from other residents." Brenda's attorney, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit, tried to poke holes in my testimony during cross-examination. "Mr. Brennan, were you aware that your lease agreement included provisions requiring you to follow HOA rules and regulations?" "I was aware there was an HOA, yes." "And were you aware that high-wattage space heaters were prohibited under those rules?" "I was not aware of that specific rule, no. And even if I had been, that does not give someone the right to break into my home and steal my property." Mr. Carmichael did not break in. She used a key provided by property management for the purpose of conducting an inspection. She entered without notice and without following the proper procedures outlined in the HOA's own bylaws. Carol Fletcher from Property Management confirmed that. The attorney tried a few more angles, but nothing stuck. The judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. Rather than go through a full trial, Brenda eventually accepted a plea deal in April. She pleaded guilty to 6 counts of petty theft and 1 count of criminal trespass. She was sentenced to 90 days in jail, suspended pending completion of 1-year probation, community service, and restitution to all the affected residents and the landlord. The restitution part was significant. She had to pay each of us back the value of our space heaters, plus pay Richard Morrison the full $3,000 in excess utility costs. Given that she was also facing eviction and legal fees, it was a hefty financial hit. By the time May rolled around, Brenda had moved out of Riverside Meadows. I never saw her again, though I heard through the building gossip chain that she had moved in with a relative somewhere across town and was working part-time at a grocery store to pay off her restitution. The new HOA board, led by a reasonable guy named Tom who worked as an accountant, sent out a revised set of rules and regulations. The space heater prohibition was changed to allow devices up to 2,000 watts, provided they had automatic shut-off features and were not left running unattended. There were other changes too, rolling back some of Brenda's more draconian policies. Life in the building improved significantly. People were friendlier, less worried about petty rule violations. The common areas were maintained but not obsessively regulated. It felt like an actual community instead of a prison camp. I kept my original 1,800-watt space heater, which had been returned to me as part of the criminal case resolution. It sat in my closet, though, because I had grown attached to the newer, lower wattage model I had bought. Plus, the building maintenance had finally gotten around to properly fixing the radiator system after Richard Morrison invested in some overdue repairs. My apartment stayed comfortably warm without needing supplemental heat. On a sunny afternoon in June, I ran into Carol in the parking lot. She was carrying a box of files to her car. "Moving on?" I asked. She laughed. "No, just reorganizing, getting rid of old records. You know, I have been managing properties for 15 years and I have never seen anything quite like the Brenda situation. It was definitely unique." "The thing is," she said, setting the box down for a moment, she genuinely believed she was right. Even at the end, even after being arrested and pleading guilty, I think she still thought she was just enforcing the rules and that everyone else was being unreasonable. There was no self-awareness at all. Some people are like that. They get a little bit of authority and it goes to their heads. Well, at least it ended without anyone getting seriously hurt, and hopefully this building can move forward with a more normal HOA structure. As I walked back to my apartment that evening, I thought about the whole bizarre chain of events. It had started with a $42 space heater and a freezing cold apartment. It had escalated through theft, utility fraud, criminal charges, and ended with someone going to jail, sort of via probation. The lesson, if there was one, was probably about the dangers of unchecked authority and the importance of standing up when someone abuses their power. Brenda had counted on people being too intimidated or too apathetic to push back against her actions. She had counted on the system protecting her because she held a position of authority within the HOA. But she had not counted on the utility spike alerting the landlord. That was the thing that unraveled everything. If she had just confiscated the heaters and not used them, or if she had only taken one or two and used them sparingly, she might have gotten away with it. But her greed and her apparent need to keep her own apartment at tropical temperatures had created a paper trail, an evidence trail in the form of electricity bills that could not be ignored or explained away. Marcus and I grabbed beers at a local bar a few weeks later, and the subject of Brenda inevitably came up. "You think she planned it from the beginning?" he asked. "Like, did she start the whole HOA thing just so she could steal people's stuff?" I shook my head. "I think she probably started with good intentions, or at least what she thought were good intentions. She wanted to enforce rules and maintain standards. But somewhere along the way, she started believing that the rules gave her unlimited power. And then, when she saw an opportunity to solve her own problem, the fact that her apartment was cold, she rationalized taking our heaters as a legitimate use of her authority. That is the scary part, though. She did not see it as stealing. She saw it as enforcement. Exactly. And that is why people like that are dangerous in positions of power, even small-scale power like an HOA. They stop seeing the people around them as equals with rights and start seeing them as subjects who need to be controlled. We drank in silence for a moment, then Marcus raised his glass. Here is to never letting anyone like that get power in our building again. I clinked my glass against his. I will drink to that. The summer passed uneventfully, which was exactly what I wanted. I worked. I hung out with friends. I enjoyed having an apartment that maintained a reasonable temperature without drama. The new HOA board sent out occasional emails about community events or maintenance schedules, but they were reasonable and respectful. No more passive-aggressive notes, no more threats of fines for minor infractions, no more surprise inspections. In August, I got an email from Detective Chen. She was following up on the case, letting everyone know that Brenda had completed her first few months of probation without incident and was making regular restitution payments. It was a courtesy update, not really necessary but appreciated nonetheless. The detective noted that the case had been used as a training example for other officers about the sometimes fine line between civil disputes and criminal behavior, and how abuse of organizational authority could cross that line. I saved the email, a small piece of documentation for a chapter of my life that had been far more dramatic than I ever anticipated when I bought a simple space heater. By September, even the gossip about Brenda had died down. New residents had moved into the building, people who had not been there during the drama and who only knew the story secondhand if at all. Life moved on, as it always does. I was working late one evening in October when I heard a knock on my door. I opened it to find Richard Morrison, the landlord, standing in the hallway. I had only seen him once or twice since the building meeting back in February. "Tyler, do you have a minute?" he asked. "Sure, come on in." He entered, looking around the apartment with the evaluating eye of someone who owned the building. "Place looks good. No issues with anything." "No, everything has been fine. The heat is working great now." He nodded. "Yeah, we invested in upgrading the whole system after everything. It was overdue anyway." He paused, seeming slightly uncomfortable. "Look, I wanted to thank you personally for how you handled the situation with Brenda. You could have made things a lot more difficult, could have sued me or the building for the break-in, but you worked with us to resolve it reasonably." "I just wanted my space heater back," I said with a slight smile, "or at least to not have someone breaking into my apartment." "Still, I appreciate it. And I wanted you to know that I have implemented new policies about HOA access to units. No one can enter an apartment for inspection purposes without 72 hours written notice now, and all inspections have to be coordinated through Carol with a property management representative present. What Brenda did will not happen again." "That is good to hear. Also, your lease is up for renewal in a few months. I am offering you a 10% discount on your rent for next year as a thank you for your patience during all of this. That was unexpected and genuinely appreciated. Thank you. That is very generous." We chatted for a few more minutes about the building and the improvements he was making. Then he left. I sat back down at my computer, feeling a sense of closure. The entire situation had been absurd and frustrating, but it had worked out in the end. Justice had been served, reforms had been made, and I was even getting a rent discount out of it. The holidays approached, and the building took on a festive atmosphere. The new HOA board organized a holiday party in the common room in December, a casual gathering with snacks and drinks. I went, more out of a sense of community obligation than genuine enthusiasm, but I ended up having a good time. It was nice to interact with neighbors in a relaxed setting, without the underlying tension that had existed when Brenda was in charge. Marcus brought his girlfriend, and we all stood around talking about our plans for the holidays. Someone mentioned Brenda at one point, and there was a collective groan. Can we have one building event where we do not talk about the space heater incident? Paula, the second-floor resident, said with a laugh. Agreed, Tom, the new HOA president, said. New rule, no more Brenda talk. We are moving forward. And that was exactly what we did. The calendar flipped to the new year, and life continued its normal rhythm. I got promoted at work in February, which came with a nice raise and more responsibilities. The rent discount from Richard helped offset my other expenses as I saved up for eventually buying my own place. I never did see Brenda again, though I occasionally wondered what had happened to her. Had she learned anything from the experience? Did she still believe she had been in the right? Or had the consequences finally forced some self-reflection? I would never know, and truthfully, it did not matter. Her chapter in my life was closed. The space heater that had started everything sat in my closet, a reminder of how small actions can cascade into larger consequences, and how important it is to stand up when something is wrong, even over something as seemingly trivial as a $42 appliance. Because it was never really about the space heater. It was about respect, boundaries, and the rule of law. It was about ensuring that people in positions of authority, even minor ones like an HOA presidency, are held accountable when they abuse that authority. It was about making sure that your home remains your sanctuary, not subject to invasion by someone who thinks rules give them unlimited power. Spring arrived in Columbus with the usual mix of rain and gradually warming temperatures. The trees around Riverside Meadows started budding, the grass turned green, and people emerged from their winter hibernation. I sat on my balcony one sunny April afternoon, a year after Brenda had accepted her plea deal, and reflected on how much had changed. The building felt different now, lighter somehow. There was a sense of community that had not existed before, or perhaps had existed but had been suppressed under Brenda's authoritarian regime. People chatted in the parking lot, held impromptu barbecues using the grills in the common area, and looked out for each other. Carol stopped by my apartment one last time in May, just before I signed my lease renewal with the discounted rate. She had some paperwork for me to review, and we ended up talking for a while about everything that had happened. You know what is funny, she said. In a weird way, the whole Brenda situation made this building better. It forced Richard to invest in upgrades he had been putting off. It got residents more engaged in building governance, and it taught everyone a lesson about the importance of reasonable rules and oversight. That is a pretty expensive silver lining, I pointed out. True. But still, could have been worse. At least nobody got hurt, and the person who did wrong faced consequences. In a lot of HOA horror stories I have heard, the bad actors just keep getting away with it because people do not push back. She was right about that. If I had not filed the police report, if Carol had not backed me up, if the utility spike had not been caught, Brenda might have continued her pattern of abuse indefinitely. Sometimes justice requires someone to stand up and say no, this is not okay, even when it is easier to just let it go. I signed the lease renewal, locked in another year at Riverside Meadows with my 10% discount. Marcus joked that I should buy a third space heater just to celebrate, but I declined. 2 was plenty, and honestly, with the improved heating system, I barely needed even 1 anymore. The summer of that second year was peaceful. I worked, I hung out with friends. I enjoyed the simple pleasure of living in an apartment without drama. No surprise inspections, no passive-aggressive notes, no one stealing my belongings. Just normal, boring, wonderful everyday life. In August, I ran into Tom from the HOA board at the grocery store. We chatted while waiting in line at the checkout. "How are things going with the board?" I asked. "Really good, actually. We have been focusing on community building stuff rather than enforcement. Movie nights, building maintenance days where everyone pitches in, that kind of thing. Much better vibe." "That is great to hear." "Yeah, I think everyone learned from the Brenda situation that an HOA should exist to make living here better, not to give someone a power trip. As long as we keep that in mind, we should be fine." I thought about his words as I drove home. That really was the core issue, was it not? Organizations like HOAs are supposed to serve the community, to facilitate better living conditions and resolve common issues. They are not supposed to be vehicles for petty tyrants to impose their will on others. Brenda had forgotten that, or perhaps had never understood it in the first place. She had seen the HOA presidency as a position of authority over people rather than a position of service to the community. And that fundamental misunderstanding had led to her downfall. As the months rolled on toward the end of that second year, I found myself increasingly grateful for how everything had worked out. Yes, the situation with Brenda had been stressful and frustrating. Yes, it had consumed time and emotional energy that I would rather have spent elsewhere. But it had also taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of community support, and about how systems of justice, imperfect as they are, can sometimes actually work when people engage with them. My cheap space heater had been the catalyst for all of it. A simple device meant to keep me warm during a cold Ohio winter had instead sparked a chain of events involving theft, fraud, criminal charges, and ultimately justice. If someone had told me when I bought that heater at Target that it would lead to someone being arrested and convicted, I would have thought they were insane. But life is strange that way. Small actions ripple outward in unpredictable ways. A stolen space heater leads to a utility spike, which leads to an investigation, which uncovers a pattern of abuse and theft, which leads to criminal charges and reform. Each step follows logically from the one before, but the end point is far removed from the beginning. I kept the space heater, even though I rarely used it anymore. It sat in my closet, a tangible reminder of an absurd chapter in my life. Sometimes, when I saw it while grabbing something else from the closet, I would shake my head and smile. $42 and a power-hungry HOA president. That was all it took to turn my quiet life upside down for a few months. But I survived it. Brenda faced consequences for her actions, and the building was better for having gone through the ordeal. Not the way anyone would have chosen to improve things, but effective nonetheless. As December rolled around again, marking 2 full years since Brenda had stolen my space heater, the building held its second annual holiday party under the new HOA regime. The turnout was even better than the year before, with the common room packed with residents eating, drinking, and celebrating together. Someone had even made cookies shaped like space heaters as a joke, which got a lot of laughs. The incident had become part of building lore, a shared story that bonded the community together. We could laugh about it now because it was over, because justice had been served, because the danger had passed. I stood in the corner of the room, nursing a beer and watching people interact. Marcus was there with his girlfriend, now his fiancée. Paula was chatting with Tom about organizing a building cleanup day in the spring. Carol had stopped by with her husband, enjoying the party even though she was not technically a resident. Richard Morrison made a brief appearance, thanked everyone for being great tenants, and mentioned some more improvements he was planning for the upcoming year. He caught my eye at one point and gave me a nod of acknowledgement, a silent recognition of the role I had played in transforming the building's culture. As the party wound down and people started drifting back to their apartments, I felt a deep sense of contentment. This place, Riverside Meadows, had become a real home, not just an apartment I rented, but a community I was part of. And while the path to getting here had been strange and frustrating, I would not change it. Well, maybe I would change the part where someone broke into my apartment and stole my stuff. That part could have been skipped. But the outcome, the reforms, the improved community, the accountability and justice, those were all worth the temporary frustration. I walked back to my apartment that night, climbed the stairs to the third floor, and unlocked my door. The apartment was warm and comfortable, exactly as it should be. No need for space heaters, no fear of unwanted intrusions, no petty tyrants dictating how I could live in my own home. Just peace, quiet, and the satisfaction of knowing that when someone had wronged me, I had stood up for myself and seen it through to a just conclusion. That $42 space heater had cost Brenda Carmichael far more than she ever could have imagined, and the lesson was clear for anyone paying attention. Respect people's rights and boundaries. Follow the rules that apply to everyone, including yourself. Do not abuse positions of authority. And never, ever underestimate how a simple utility bill can unravel an entire scheme. I made myself a cup of tea, settled onto my couch, and smiled. Life was good. The space heater incident, as it would forever be known in Riverside Meadows lore, was finally and completely behind us. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new mundane moments of everyday life. But tonight, I was content to simply exist in the calm aftermath of chaos, warm and safe in my apartment, with my space heaters sitting unused in the closet where they belonged. The end of the story was not dramatic. There was no final confrontation, no last-minute twist. Just the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved, a wrong righted, and a community made better through the ordeal. Sometimes that is enough. Sometimes that is exactly what justice looks like when it works the way it should. And somewhere out there, Brenda Carmichael was living with the consequences of her actions, hopefully having learned that authority without accountability is tyranny, and that tyranny, no matter how small the scale, eventually faces a reckoning. My cheap space heater had been the instrument of that reckoning, and I was perfectly fine with that. I finished my tea, turned off the lights, and went to bed in my comfortably warm apartment, grateful for heat that worked properly, neighbors who respected boundaries, and an HOA that actually served the community instead of ruling over it. It was a good life, made all the better by having fought for it when someone tried to take it away. The space heater remained in the closet, silent and still, its job done. It had kept me warm during cold nights, sparked a battle over rights and rules, and ultimately helped bring down a petty tyrant. Not bad for a $42 appliance from Target. Not bad at all.